We all have our favorite Vikings season. For most of you, it's probably 98 or 2009, or if you're older, maybe something earlier. But I want to talk about something that gets a little forgotten. I want to talk about 1987 because it's a hell of a ride. Let me tell you a story on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL, shows on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Vikings listeners get $50 off of purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement, so use promo code Locked On at checkout. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. Let's get into it. So OTAs are over. We are now in minicamp. So let's talk about kind of what we learned. We got to talk to a lot of position coaches. There was some interesting stuff about the offensive line and depth chart and stuff. We saw the depth chart get a little bit stressed as Austin Schlottman and Vidarian Lowe came down with food poisoning. We'll probably miss the rest of the spring, I would imagine, with that. You just shut them down. And so we kind of see what happens when they get stress tested a little bit. And that's interesting. Also, still Amir Smith-Marset in a walking boot, still no KJ Osborne. I talked last week about a little bit of a concern with, what's up for it with Za'Darius Smith. He's back, so we're all good. That's the result we were all hoping for, so that's excellent. And that's, I think that's it for injury news, but really what I think people are going to talk about the most is Chris Reed moved to center in minicamp. And I think a lot of that has to do with Austin Schlottman going down. They did not have a second team center. Somebody needs to play center on the second team. They're not going to have Bradbury do double duty. That would be insane. Somebody's got to do it. And that somebody was Chris Reed. So that tells us a few things. A, Wyatt Davis isn't moving to center. If anybody's going to move to center, it's Chris Reed. Chris Reed probably would be functionally like center 3 on the team then. And Austin Schlottman is center 2 as we go, which gives Schlottman a much better chance than I thought of making the team. I might even put him in my roster thing, in my roster prediction next time I do one, just knowing that he's second. Okay, he's backup center. That's going to be his job. And Chris Reed is still, I think, nominally in the right guard competition. I know he played at center in a day of OTAs, but again, that really seems like that. It's not just a random coincidence that happened the same day center 2 went out with food poisoning. It's just how they dealt with that situation. So try not to read it more into it. This is my rule of thumb for these things. When there's an obvious, like Occam's razor, when there's an obvious reason, it's that. They're not having Chris Reed move to center, I don't think permanently, unless he looks super, super comfortable at that position and they're like, oh my God, wow, we should have been doing this with him all along. And then they change their mind on that. But I have to imagine that's not the intention. And something would have to actively change their minds. That's kind of it on the spring program right now. But I guess I just wanted to answer the question I know I'm going to get a lot this spring about Chris Reed, because my guess, this is how this is going to happen. I don't think if Austin Schlottman doesn't come back before the end of minicamp, maybe he grabs the last day of minicamp or something and we get to see. But assuming he doesn't come back, the last thing we will have seen is Chris Reed as center 2. And then we will have the next 2 months to be Chris Reed is a center and talk and gaslight ourselves into it. That's not what's going to happen. We'll see what happens when they all report to actual camp in, late July. We'll see what the depth chart is there. And my guess will be Chris Reed will be splitting reps with Jesse Davis at right guard again. They also talked about Ed Ingram. He is taking all the second team reps, and they're just trying to get him up to speed. I wouldn't expect him to take starting reps, but I do still think he can win the job. But it's going to take all of camp to do that. That's going to be something that a decision they maybe make on the last preseason game or something like that. And then Wyatt Davis is the third team right guard. He was actually playing second team left guard, which might be his best shot to make the team at this point. So again, it's all a lot of unknowns and we got to see how camp shakes out. But if Wyatt Davis has a bad camp, he's ousted. He's gone. I'm sorry. And that really sucks for a second year, third rounder. That's a big old whiff, but we're not to that point yet. And there's a lot of game left, right? This is 3-0 leads in the first quarter after the first drive kind of stuff. There's no reason to panic over anything. A lot of game to be played. Let me shift gears, though. I want to tell you a story about one of my favorite Vikings seasons, probably one of your favorite Viking seasons, too. You ask everybody what's their favorite, and you'd probably say 98 or 09 or maybe like the 69 season if you were around for that. But you don't often hear 1987. 1987 is a bit of an underrated Vikings season, not just because it's another one where they went to the NFC Championship, and it had, the things most people know about it are they had the Anthony Carter 227 yards against the 49ers game. They put up 44 in the Superdome against the Saints in the wild card round that year. That's the strike year, which we'll talk about. But that was the year where replacement players came in, dropped 3 straight, and the Vikings went 8-4 outside of that. So they ended up 8-7 to end that year. And they got the last wild card spot and kind of snuck in, and they had to be road warriors. And maybe if they had a home game, that would have been a little easier or something. That's what most people know. It's the year where the replacements could have come in and maybe done a little better. It's the year where they went to the NFC Championship, and it's the year where Darren Nelson dropped it on the goal line. Y'all, there is so much more. I'm so excited to share it all with you. It is a very dope story of kind of the coming out party of a very dope and underrated, I think, iteration of the Vikings, with a lot of Ring of Honor players, a lot of Hall of Fame guys on there, and dudes that we all remember forever for this run that kind of starts in 1987. But before I get into that, let me tell you about Blue Nile. Blue Nile is your online jeweling experts. They have experts on 24/7. So whether it's an engagement ring or an anniversary or birthday present or whatever for that special someone, maybe you're just getting a gift to be nice. You don't need an occasion to do something nice for a person that you love. Go to BlueNile.com for it. You can build the engagement ring or the whatever of her dreams. And importantly to me, at least, Blue Nile uses the Kimberley process, which is the diamond industry's process for ensuring that the suppliers of their diamonds aren't committing human rights violations. So you're avoiding conflict diamonds and blood diamonds and all of that really nasty stuff, which is really important to me. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Vikings listeners get $50 off of purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement, so use promo code LOCKEDON. That's code LOCKEDON, all one word. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. Hey y'all, that Locked On listener survey is still going on, so if you haven't gotten to it, please go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. It is your chance to tell us as Locked On Podcasts what you like and what you don't like. We are gathering information to try to make our products better for you, so let us know what you think so your voices can be heard. We wouldn't want to do something that you guys don't want. So go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey, and if you finish it, you can qualify for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Ticketmaster gift cards. So go take our audience survey at lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. Thank you so much for your help. Let me talk about this 1987 season. The Vikings headed into 1987 were ready to compete. I mean, they had a very stacked roster. They had guys like Chris Dolman already and Keith Millard. They had an unreal linebacking core, and they were all a bunch of veterans. I mean, this was your Kendricks Barr, but there was Studwell, Fred McNeil, and Matt Blair all had been around. They were all making Pro Bowls by now. You had Joey Browner. I'm not going to name everybody. They had Anthony Carter, who obviously had his big moment this year. They had Tommy Kramer, and they hoped that he would stay healthy, though he gets hurt in the second game of the year, which happens to him a lot. But the backup, Wade Wilson, played very, very well in this year, so the quarterbacking was good. They had Gary Zimmerman on the offensive line. It was a dope roster, and they were ready to play. And they had been out of the playoffs for 4 straight years, which hadn't happened to the Vikings since they were an expansion team. So they were ready to get back on that horse and get into contention again. And, that was all Les Steckel and Bud Grant coming in and out of retirement and then transitioning to Jerry Burns. And that was all a big, hard thing. But in the meantime, they were sort of building and developing players really slowly but surely. But it had been long enough. It was time to start winning games. And that's exactly what they did. First 2 games of the season, they fall behind, and then they come back and they win. Including in the second game, I want to say it was against the Rams. That's where Tommy Kramer gets hurt. They fall behind. Wade Wilson comes in, cleans it up, and they end up 2-0. And then all hell breaks loose. The 1987 strike hits. The players decide that they are going to go on strike for like the fifth time in like 20 years. There had been a lot of strikes ever since the NFLPA was recognized as the players' union by the NFL. There had been a lot of little conflicts with little concessions. It was kind of just enough to paper things over for a few years before the players were trying to get something else and they had to go on strike again for it. They had, one of them was they got the wage scale where the player salaries would increase with player revenue, which we still have today. There was one that gave us free agency, or like a precursor to what we now know as free agency, but before teams had a lot more control over where players could go play, even after their contracts expired. That one had a lot to do with Joe Kapp and his actions at the end of his career, and Alan Page was like a big leader in the union at that time. So the Vikings players at least had a hand in that. And all these kind of all of these not sweeping overhaul changes, but like these single issue little concessions, a little more money here, a little more healthcare there. 1982, though, was the strike that really messed things up, because that strike ended up canceling 7 games of the season, and the NFL did not like it at all. And they eventually gave the players what they wanted in that strike. So when the players were going on strike again in 1987, the NFL said, we're not doing this again. So they go on strike on, I think, September 24th, 1987. Check me on that. And then like 4 days later was supposed to be a game. There was not a game. And the next week, they're like, we can't cancel this again. So they decide, all right, we'll let you do replacement players. So you can bring in whoever you can find, right? Anybody who's not under contract, and it becomes like this total free-for-all scramble. And teams are going out to the USFL cast-offs, right? The USFL had folded a couple years prior, and all the good players got snapped up to real contracts, but they were like going back to that talent pool, and they were going to like whoever didn't make teams. And in the CFL, the Montreal Alouettes had just folded, so those guys were in high demand. Like, those are professional football to anybody that played football. And the Vikings sat the whole thing out because Mike Lynn, man of many decisions people don't like a lot. This was definitely one of those moments. Kind of went, I think this is all blowover. And he didn't think that that any games would actually be played. He didn't think they would play actual replacement games. He kind of thought it was a bluff, so he didn't bother going out and finding replacement players. And he didn't realize he was wrong until it was way too late. So they were scrambling to find players. It was wild. They went to D3 colleges. They went and they were like pulling guys out of retirement. I mean, they were pulling like bartenders that played high school football off the street. And they were like, we don't have a quarterback. And the game is like very close. Like, it was getting down to the wire. And they were sitting there in the coach's room going like, do any of us have experience? And they almost, I might even make this the title of the show. One guy raises his hand. Hey, I played in high school. It's Pete Carroll at 36, defensive backs coach. Almost quarterbacked some games for the Vikings as a coach. Could you imagine something like that happening today? Like Ed Donatel suits up, right? Or like Kevin O'Connell has to suit up and play some because all the players have gone on strike. It was a total catastrophe. And those players went 0-3, and pretty famously, right? They lost all the games, and the Vikings were 8-7, but they were much better than that. Everybody knows it. Part of that, too, was the coaches. And the coaches were loyal to their players. They were like, you're not getting a job here, y'all. Like, you're here to fill a temporary role because we have a temporary opening. But when the players come back, they're all getting their jobs back. We're not going to replace anyone because they went on strike, which I think was their kind of what they could do to show support. So they were very vocal about that with the replacement players, which is a great show of loyalty to your actual players, not a great motivational tactic. So all the replacement players knew that they were just kind of here to get a paycheck and get out. So they were like smoking on the sideline. They had popping beers at halftime of these games. They didn't care at all. And it just like it just turned into this total catastrophe. They got blown out on every game. They did find a quarterback, by the way. They like pulled some dude who had been a backup for a couple of years for the Chiefs and then was playing in like flag football in Canada, who was older than Pete Carroll at the time. He was 37. They like pulled that dude and he played quarterback and he sucked and it all sucked. Meanwhile, though, the players themselves were off at Normandale Community College in Bloomington, where they were practicing and they were joking around like, I think the Normandale team could beat these Vikings, and they might have been right. But they were working their tails off. They were staying in shape. They were doing whatever they could to basically simulate a regular practice schedule, and they stayed unified. They were one of just a few teams to not have anybody cross the picket line over money. They had 2 players that actually did end up going into the facility because they needed injury treatment, and they did so with the full approval of all their teammates. So, and a lot of players did. Like, if you were injured, you kind of just sat that one out, and everybody was okay with it. So the Vikings were like unified, and they were together, and they grew so much stronger, and they were in so much better shape. Other teams had players crossing picket lines, and they were insulting each other in the press, and there were fights, and there were, they would divide and kind of fall apart, and the Vikings were strong. And so then they entered the back half of that season with a fiery passion and a whole bunch of losses to avenge. We'll talk about what happens next. But first, let me talk to you about the best tasting protein bar on the planet. It is Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the planet. They have all sorts of flavors that are the originals, the ones you know, chocolate raspberry, chocolate mint, chocolate peanut butter, all the classics. You can get all that. But allow me to introduce you to caramel brownie. Who doesn't love a brownie coated in delicious caramel sauce? The caramel brownie Built Bar is like tricking your brain into thinking that you're having one of those. But 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar in that thing. So it's not going to knock you off the wagon, totally guilt-free kind of snack. But the best part is still covered in 100% chocolate, like all things at Built Bar, so you're not sacrificing tastiness for healthiness. All of Built's bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and has a bunch of health benefits because of it, so you're getting more bang for your buck for that as well. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off of your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. The 1987 strike was a resounding defeat for the players and the players' union. They were defeated. They were demoralized. Basically, the idea of having replacement games be played and players having the opportunity to cross the picket line and play games and actually having a place for them to go turned out to be just too tempting for too many players, especially players that like really needed that money, but some that didn't, like, Joe Montana. That kind of ended up eroding the whole thing, and it did him in. It was a very demoralizing defeat. And a lot of people were super bummed about it. But the Vikings had a very positive attitude throughout the whole thing. When they cleared out all their lockers and got all their stuff, it wasn't a contentious, it wasn't a fight. They weren't yelling at anybody. The coaches kind of understood. Everybody kind of got it. And they kind of just like grabbed all their stuff and went, all right, well, see you when you see you, Dave. And that was it. And when they would picket the games, and when the scabs, the replacement players, would come show up and cross the picket line, the Vikings, unlike a lot of teams, the Vikings didn't spit at them, they didn't hit them, they didn't sneer at them. It was peaceful. They wave at them. They said, we're doing our thing, you're doing your thing, and there was a respect there. And so it was all not nearly as like emotional for the Vikings as it was for other teams. And so when they came back in shape, unified, having all stuck together, no schisms, as it were, it's not all that surprising that a team with that much talent that had gone 2-0 on one side of the strike then went 5-1 on the other side of the strike. And they were 8-4 with 3 of those losses being with replacement players. They were absolutely one of the best teams in the league that year, even though they were 8-7. Things sort of fell apart a little bit down the stretch. They had some close defeats. Chicago still won the division, but it was an 87. These were the monsters of the Midway. They kind of had a stranglehold on it in the mid-80s. And it wouldn't be until the next year, until 88, that the Vikings would take the division back and sort of end that dynasty, which they're actually pretty good at in terms of like NFC Central rival dynasties. Because they also did that to the Packers in the 90s. Anyways, the Vikings don't win the division. They get the 5th seed, and they go travel to the New Orleans Saints, who are playing the first ever playoff game the Saints have ever had. The Saints were a total mess of an organization for like 20 years before this, or 15, or however long they had been a team. And they were like the stepping stone. They were the doormat of the league, and they were actually in the playoffs. So the environment and the vibe at the Superdome was incredible. It's so weird watching that game And it sounds like it's the greatest moment ever for a franchise, which to that point, it totally was. And they whooped them. The Vikings win 44-10. The game gets broken wide open on an Anthony Carter punt return, and he'd be pretty good in those playoffs. He gets a punt return touchdown, and then everything goes. They had running backs throwing up touchdowns. It was insane. 44-10 whooping of the Saints, but that's not the playoff game everybody thinks about when they think about the 1987 season. They either, if they're happy about it, they think about the 49ers, and if they're sad, they think about the NFC Championship. But that divisional game against the 49ers is so perfect for this whole narrative, because you have this whole strike thing, and the players were demoralized, and they were fighting for what is very normal to us today. They wanted changes to free agency that eventually would be made. And we would think it's completely insane if they reverted on that, like things we totally take for granted. And they couldn't win that fight. And a big reason they couldn't win that fight is because of the players that crossed the picket line. A lot of those players, especially like the real watershed moment, seems like it was the 49ers. Joe Montana and a lot of the bigger name 49ers players went and crossed the picket line. And I don't know, you'd have to ask them. I don't know what their rationale was. I'm sure you could look it up. I'm sure it was written up in a newspaper somewhere. Maybe they were kind of they were the Patriots of the 80s, right? Which is also part of this. Like, they're like the perfect bad guy for this. It's like, it's a movie. The juggernaut team, they were far and away the best team in the NFC. And Chicago would lose their home divisional playoff game as well. So it was like the road was wide open. Maybe that had something to do with it. But either way, you're going in to play this Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Bill Walsh. I mean, at the peak of their powers. And you go in there and you stomp them. And that's why everybody remembers this game, because the 49ers were so good. I mean, this was peak. This was, the Chargers going in and beating up Tom Brady in the middle of the 2010s. Like, this is insane playoff heroics. And again, the hero of the hour is Anthony Carter with his big 227 yard game. Sometimes I love to just go look that up on you. Just look up Anthony Carter 49ers. You'll find it. Somebody cut up all his highlights. It's just such a dope game. I mean, everything was breaking just so perfectly for Anthony Carter. There was one play that sticks in my head where the cornerback gets his hand and tips it, and it tips right up and it just falls in his lap anyways, and he goes and he runs for like 30 more yards. Everything was just breaking the Vikings' way. And it wasn't like there was no drama to the game. They went up by 2 scores. They were basically traded scores from there, and the game was never really in that much jeopardy. And the Vikings won by a final tally of 36-24. That led us to the NFC Championship, which was a very evenly matched game. I mean, this was not the Vikings. I don't think they were favored in the game, but this would not have been some historic upset if the Vikings managed to pull that one off. It was this hard fought, grind them out, drag it out. Like, it was a total slugfest. Wade Wilson took like 8 sacks. Doug Williams, who was the quarterback, they were, like a quarterback competition thing all year, which is a whole interesting story in and of its own. Doug Williams being the first black quarterback to win a Super Bowl was kind of its own thing. Like, if the 49ers were the bad guys, Washington was the good guys, especially because of Doug Williams fighting his way into that starting spot and then fighting his way to the championship. You just, I guess, got to let him play through. But the Vikings did not go down with it without a fight. It was a bruising game. And it, of course, comes down to that final play, that Darren Nelson pass on the goal line. It was 4th and 4 with like less than a minute left. They didn't have enough timeouts to stop it. So that was it. That was the game. And their play was basically what we'd call like a smash concept now, or like a levels concept in the corner of the end zone. Anthony Carter was going to go deep, and Wade Wilson was going to be at the goal line, and the hope was that Anthony Carter brought everybody deep. So the rumor is that Anthony Carter ran his route wrong. I wasn't able to verify that, so I don't know if that's true or not, but that he ran it too shallow, or he ran like a comeback or something like that he wasn't supposed to do, and it brought Darrell Green back into the play, and Darrell Green is the one that it kind of looks like broke it up. But here's where I fall on this. Whether or not Anthony Carter did the wrong thing, like whatever. It hit Darren Nelson right in the numbers, and it didn't look like the interference was that much more than you would expect on any play on the goal line. You're catching a ball on the goal line, dude. You're going to get hit. And Darren Nelson just beefs it. That's it. It's simple as that. It's like unsatisfyingly simple. It's you would think that there needs to be, for a story this dynamic and incredible, that there needs to be some grand twist at the end that's like, this is why. No, he just messed it up, man. He just bobbled it and it dropped, and Washington goes to the Super Bowl and they blow out Denver and they win. And it's not fair, I don't think. Darren Nelson was a good Viking. He was explosive. He had good hands. He had all sorts of great plays. He ran tough. He was a good Viking, all things considered. And I think what most people are always going to remember him for was that play, or they could have had Marcus Allen, and they picked Darren Nelson instead. That's like the two things that he goes down for, and I don't think that's fair to him at all. He's still like a valued member of the Minnesota community. But hey, that's how it goes. Tomorrow, I don't know what we'll do tomorrow. We'll figure something out. I might do something modern and something historic. We'll see. It'll be something fun, though. I'll have at least a good story for you, if not some good tape stuff. We might even try to talk to Sam Ekstrom, who's been at OTAs. He's doing Locked On Minnesota Sports now, too. So we might try to talk to him, too, this at the end of the week. Whatever it is, I'll bring it to you, and I will see you then. And as always, Skull.